So welcome to the San Pasqual Valley GSP Stakeholder Workshop. This is our stakeholder workshop where we wanted to specifically address two topics, and that is the initial surface recharge evaluation, which is our management action number 7 in the San Pasqual Valley GSP, and then the groundwater sustainability plan response to comments. So we'll do just a high level overview of the comments that we received and how we incorporated them into the final plan. My name is Rosalind Prickett with Woodard & Curran. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And when Karina gets back, we'll have her say a few words as well. You want to jump in here, Karina?
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, now we can.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. Hi, everyone. I want to welcome everybody to this stakeholder workshop. And just to give you guys a little bit of background, we've been, the county and the city are the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, and we are responsible for developing and implementing a groundwater sustainability plan for the San Pasqual Valley groundwater basin per state mandate, which is SGMA. And so this meeting is actually, it's not our regular advisory committee meeting. This is just a general stakeholder meeting that we wanted to hold to cover 2 items per stakeholder input. And the 2 items that Rosalind is going to cover are the initial surface water recharge evaluation draft scope or work plan. And then the other one is going to be covering the comments that we received during the 60-day comment period that was hosted in the summer, and then how we address those comments, whether that we made changes to the GSP itself, or if we had a response to a comment, or if we didn't make a change, why we didn't make a change. So again, I want to thank everybody for taking the time out of your busy schedule to make it to this meeting. It was kind of a little bit of a short notice, but we wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to provide updates on these 2 items. We have county staff present as well as city staff, and Rosalind is with Woodard & Curran, which is our consultant that has been helping us in developing this GSP for this basin. So with that, I will hand it over to Rosalind.
Thanks, Karina. So we will start with just a brief overview of our stakeholder input format. So as Karina mentioned, this isn't an advisory committee in this format the same way that we had been operating during the planning process. So comments will not be limited to advisory committee members throughout the course of the meeting, with public comment at end. Everyone is welcome to speak up, ask questions, give us comments. There'll be a break after a portion of slides for each of the 2 agenda topics, and anyone is welcome to speak up at any point in time. Those wishing to speak that are online, if you could use the chat function just to let me know that you'd like to speak, I will go ahead and call on you in the order that you put your name in the chat. And then of course, I'll always ask for verbal comments after that to make sure that anyone, it looks like I only have 1 caller, but I'll give that caller an opportunity to comment as well. Heidi Gantwork is our typical facilitator. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here with us today, so I'm going to be playing the role of facilitator. So if you'll just, if you have any comments, just get my attention. Again, my name is Rosalind. Follow-up questions and comments. If you have anything that occurs to you after this meeting is over at 5 o'clock, you're welcome to email Karina at any time, and her email address is here on the slide. So as I said, meeting agenda, roll call's already done. I greeted everyone as you all joined. We have our initial surface water recharge evaluation. I kind of wanted to walk you through the scope of work for what we're anticipating for management action 7, and then also give you a summary of the GSP comments that we received and how we responded to those. So our objectives are to review the draft scope and to summarize those comments. So let's start with the initial surface recharge evaluation. Recall that during the planning process for the GSP, we went through, we talked about all of the different projects and management actions that we were recommending for inclusion in the GSP. We talked about those at multiple advisory committee meetings and at technical peer review meetings. And the initial surface recharge evaluation is Management Action 7. As part of the comments that the city has received, moving the GSP adoption through their Environment Committee and to their City Council, the city's received comments to flesh out that scope a little bit more than the couple of pages that were in the groundwater sustainability plan. So we're bringing that draft scope of work to you so that we can have a conversation about what we'll be doing as part of that evaluation. So in the GSP and Management Action 7, we state that this management action involves completing an initial investigation to identify potential surface water recharge projects that warrant further analysis and develop a preliminary feasibility analysis study. We go on to acknowledge that if the benefits and feasibility for a research project are determined to be acceptable by the GSA, the GSP will be updated to identify next steps and associated tier 0, 1, and 2 management actions. And you'll recall that we grouped our management actions into those 3 tiers. To the extent that the GSA identifies a recharge project that relies on surface water supply controlled by a third party, the third party must agree that the project is feasible and consent to implementation. So this is essentially the summary description or the introduction to Management Action 7 in the plan, and we go through in the GSP and we describe the benefits of a project that includes, surface water recharge evaluation, the outreach associated with a project like that, the CEQA compliance needed for a project like that, and the GSP kind of details all of those as requested by DWR, the State Department of Water Resources. So the draft scope that we've put together for implementation of Management Action 7 is 6 primary tasks, and those include task 1, which is development of evaluation criteria. How are we going to evaluate the benefits and risks of a surface water recharge project? What kinds of criteria are we going to use, and how are we going to measure those criteria? Task 2 is to identify the water sources for potential recharge projects, and with a focus on surface water. Task 3 are to develop potential recharge strategies. How are we going to get that water into the ground to benefit the basin? Task 4 is groundwater and surface water model simulations. So Woodard and Curran is teamed with Jacobs Engineering. You remember Nate Brown, he's on the call today, that did the SPV GSP model for the GSP development, and he'll be using that tool along with a couple of others to simulate some recharge projects or alternatives that are developed as part of this process. Task 5 is an evaluation of the benefits to groundwater dependent ecosystems, GDEs, from a potential recharge project. And then task 6 is development of the preliminary feasibility study report. So I'll walk through the key features of the proposed study. So the alternatives that we'll be analyzing will include all available surface waters, including Sutherland Dam releases. And we received a number of comments during the public comment period to evaluate releases from Sutherland Dam, which is upstream of San Pasqual Basin. And so that will be one of the considerations, but we'll also be looking at other surface water sources coming into the basin. Well, multiple project benefits will be considered. So, it's important to think about not only how much replenishment water are we able to achieve, but are there any risks or benefits to water quality in the basin? Are there benefits or risks to groundwater dependent ecosystems? So those are the kinds of evaluation criteria that we'll be looking at. We're anticipating that we'll prepare draft sections for each of those 5 tasks that I listed on the previous slide. So we'll develop a chapter, one chapter after the other, and at each point in developing those chapters, stakeholders will have a chance to engage and review those chapters. And then all of those will be integrated into the overall preliminary feasibility study report. And stakeholder input will occur, like I said, at stakeholder workshops and reviews of the task deliverables. So we anticipate for this to be a two-way conversation where we're coming to you, we're talking about all of the research and analysis and development of these strategies and alternatives, and then having a conversation at the stakeholder workshops at the end of each of those tasks, or over the course in the draft of each of those tasks. So in terms of water sources, as I mentioned, this is intended to be a surface water recharge evaluation. So yes, we'll be looking at releases from Sutherland Dam, but we'll also be looking at stormwater runoff within the basin and direct precipitation in the basin and natural flow within San Isabel, Guajito, and Santa Maria Creeks. So there are a number of different surface water sources that we'll be identifying and quantifying. And a lot of that work had been done as part of the GSP process in development of the model and collecting all of those inputs to the model. So we have some really great information to work with. In terms of the surface water recharge strategies, those will include things like releases from Sutherland Reservoir. Can we do some sort of small scale stormwater detention in some of the smaller drainages draining down into the valley? Can we include check dams or inflatable dams in selected creeks to slow that water down and encourage infiltration? Is there opportunity for enhanced in-stream recharge via channel modification or off-channel recharge? Could we do some kind of diversion to an off-channel stream infiltration basin? And are there opportunities for aquifer storage and recovery via wells or other in-lieu recharge? In terms of the model simulations, so moving on to task 3, I think it is, we'll process source water data at daily timescales. As you recall, as part of the GSP modeling process, we use monthly timescales. So there's some additional level of granularity of the data that we are going to need to get into to be able to do the kind of analysis to evaluate effectively surface water recharge strategies. We'll assess new information from some recently installed stream gauges within the basin. There's a couple of new stream gauges that we didn't have data for before 2018 was when we collected all of the data for the GSP as part of GSP development. So we'll have access to some of that more recent data. We'll revise some of the input assumptions for the boundary conditions to simulate each recharge strategy, and then we'll execute and manage the simulations for each of those recharge strategies. Now, the next task is the GDE's assessment, and this was specifically requested by a couple of our commenters and our stakeholders as well, as to really kind of dig into how a surface water recharge project could support, impact, benefit groundwater dependent ecosystems. To do that, we're proposing to use some of the newer data that was recommended by some of the commenters for the GSP. And some of our comment letters recommended a new tool that was released by, I think, the Nature Conservancy with California Fish and Game, and that was the GDE Pulse tool. So there's some new tools that have been released since we did the GDE's assessment in 2019, and so we'll be able to use some of that new information to evaluate baseline conditions. We'll evaluate USGS gauge station data and other sources for the surface water flow conditions. We'll establish baseline ecological value in those potential GDEs that we identified through the GDE's assessment. And then we'll evaluate the scenarios relative to the health and distribution of GDEs. So much of the model outputs that are coming out of that the model simulations in the previous task, we'll be able to use that to help understand potential impacts and benefits to health and distribution of those GDEs. Then all of this information will be compiled into a preliminary feasibility study report. And so our thought is to evaluate and rank the recharge alternatives. And this is the list of, or tentative list of the potential evaluation criteria that we're thinking will be our starting point for task number 1. So things like the amount of additional replenishment water that is available, the degree of mitigation of the model deficit. As you know, many folks commented on the need for a surface water recharge project because our modeling did show a minor deficit in groundwater storage. So an annual, I think it was a 240 acre foot deficit in terms of our water balance. And although we acknowledged in the GSP, you know, this is kind of in the margin of error of modeling, and the GSP proposed monitoring to ensure that there is not a cumulative decline in storage over time. This was the primary project that folks recommended that we go ahead and move forward with to see if, you know, if in fact is needed, we'll have a highly ranked project that everyone has bought into. We'll also look at things like maintenance of groundwater levels, efficiency of recharge, like I said earlier, benefits and impacts to groundwater quality or GDEs. Operational considerations for both Sutherland and Hodges reservoirs will be really important as well as the cost of implementation and maintenance. So these are all the things that we'll evaluate the recharge alternatives against using the data that comes out of the model simulations and the data collected for the previous tasks. In terms of stakeholder engagement, our proposed scope of work has an extensive, as I said, stakeholder engagement process. Today, we are presenting to you our draft scope of work, and we'd like to collaborate on developing that scope of work for this surface water recharge evaluation. There will be engagement and opportunity for review and comment during the course of the preliminary feasibility study. As I said, 7 public workshops at task milestones. So we'll present the evaluation criteria in draft form and get your feedback. Present the water source analysis in draft form, so on and so forth for each of the tasks. And then down in workshops 6 and 7, we've got presenting the preliminary feasibility study itself. And then after we receive your comments, come back to you like we're doing today and present, this is what we heard, and this is how we're recommending responding. The study will be circulated for public comment for a minimum of 45 days. Public comments and responses to comments will be published at least 30 days, and then we'll hold that 7th public workshop, which will be held before the study is finalized. So here is an anticipated schedule for the process. So we anticipate, you see here, if in fact we were to begin in January of 2022, we anticipate a 2-year timeline with completion of the preliminary feasibility study in December of 2023. We start with the draft evaluation criteria and development of the scoring. How are we going to quantify evaluation of those criteria? With the little triangles are our public workshops. And then moving into evaluating of the water sources and the reservoir operations with a workshop, and so on and so forth. Down here in the end under task 6, you can see that we've planned out for those additional rounds of public input that I mentioned on the previous slide. So I think that's my last slide on the surface water recharge evaluation. I am going to pull up my chat, but it doesn't look like I have anyone entered into chat so far. Does anyone have any questions, comments, input? I see Frank not shaking his head, so no comments on that. Anita, I see that you've joined us. Welcome. And Saraya, welcome.
Thank you. Sorry, I was in another meeting, so I missed it. The first part.
Problem. No problem. It looks like I've got 2 folks on the telephone now. Either of you, do you have any questions for us? Ricky, it looks like you have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, not so much a question, it's just a comment. It's really important, I think, to everybody that any future studies that are done, and that includes the recharge study, needs to respect the need for transparency. It needs to protect the environment, and it needs to comply with the law, specifically the Trestle's decision. So I just wanted to make sure that that's, you know, out there and that everybody can agree with that. I also noted the schedule in your PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm.
Is there going to be an RFP put out for this, or are you just going to do the work?
Karina, do you want?
I can speak to that. No, there will not be an RFP. Woodward and Curran is our consultant that was selected through an RFP process. And we're in the process of amending the contract to add scope and funding so that they can actually help us complete the first annual report, which is due right after the GSP is submitted to DWR. So come April, our first annual report is due. And then we also want to get started on this study. So the amended scope of work will also include scope for this specific study, because otherwise if we go out for RFP, that's a 16-month process, and we don't want to delay that. We want to get, I think this is an important meeting or an important study for, I think, the city and stakeholders. So we want to get started on this as soon as we submit the GSP to DWR.
Thanks, Karina.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? Kira, looks like you have a question as well.
Hi, yes, thanks. This is Kara from the Nature Conservancy. Thank you for this presentation. That's okay. I appreciate it. This is, you were saying, just for the initial surface water recharge evaluation. How will this run with the other studies that are needed and required?
So I think that the first priority for the city, of course, is completing, or for the core team, city and the county, the GSAs, is completing the annual reports that are required under SGMA. And then this initial surface water recharge evaluation is the study that has been identified by the greatest number of stakeholders as being the most important study to move forward. So I think the plan is to move this one forward and begin this one as quickly as possible. And Karina, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I can add to that. I think as there's one of the tasks in here, task 5, has to evaluate benefits to GDEs. So that the outputs from that task, I think, could very well inform or be used to for a tier 1 management action that has been identified in the GSP, which is a GDE study. So what we want to do is definitely, this initial surface water recharge evaluation is our #1 priority, and we want to stagger any efforts. So we want to complete this first, and then in the future, outputs from this study could be used for the future GDE study that was identified as a tier 1 study. Hopefully that kind of answers your question.
Kara, do you have any
Yes,
thoughts?
thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
That was it.
Thanks. Okay, if there aren't any other questions, I'll move on to the comments and responses. So I'm sure you've all had a chance to take a look at the response to comments matrix. So what we did between development of the draft GSP and the final GSP is we took all of the comments that we received and we put them all into a big table, and we developed responses and kind of, in some cases, pointed folks to the location in the plan where that information might be. In other cases, we acknowledged, you know, oops, yep, there was a typo, we'll fix that, or we'll correct the label on the map. And in other cases, we added some additional, you know, further explanation or rationale to answer the question. So this summary is a very high level summary of the kind of main topical areas that folks commented on. So we received a total of 8 comment letters. Today's presentation reviews 9 general topic areas, and I kept it relatively brief, so because I knew we only had about an hour and a half today, so I wanted to make sure that we left lots of time for any sort of additional comments or questions that you all had. And the 9 items are listed here: the understanding or study of bedrock and residuum, future potential pumping reductions, disadvantaged communities and domestic users, GDE's assessment, public engagement and access, model construction and calibration, water quality monitoring and threshold, Sutherland Dam, and general comments. We did make pretty significant changes to the GSP based on all of the comments received, and I'll go through as part of the slides and I'll explain where exactly we added some new information or rationale or explanation or table to respond to those comments. Handout number 1 that Karina sent out with the meeting announcement, and that is also uploaded to our program website, includes kind of a high-level summary of all of the sections of the plan that have the primary changes in them. So there's a nice little summary. If you are curious if we made changes to, you know, the section on groundwater quality, minimum thresholds, you can go to that, and it indicates that we did in fact make those changes. So we'll start with number 1, the understanding and study of bedrock and residuum. We did receive several comments that reference the interaction between bedrock and residuum. And as you know, this is a topic that we discussed a lot in both the advisory committee and the technical peer review group. And there were various opinions on how this should be addressed and where to include the discussion or not include the discussion in the GSP. Our response to all of those comments is essentially the basin is defined in Bulletin 118 and includes the alluvium and the residuum. Implementation of the San Pasqual Valley GSP and management for Sigma will be in accordance with Bulletin 118. But stating that there is a potential hydrologic connection between the basin and granitic rock is not ignoring the basin boundary and that basin definition that's included in a couple of our different chapters. It's simply recognizing that there is a potential inflow to the basin, and the GSA under Water Code 10725 may conduct investigations for the purposes of determining the need for groundwater management. Item number 2 is future potential pumping reductions. We received comments from stakeholders on essentially concern that the calculation of any future potential pumping reductions needs to consider the preemptive actions that some of the water users, those farmers in the basin, have already taken. So things like putting in irrigation efficiencies, fallowing ground, removing different varietals, or changing crops. And all of those activities are happening incrementally over time to save water or to respond to sometimes, you know, climate conditions. And so wanting to, the commenters just wanted to make sure that, you know, those things were, they got credit for those things that in any future potential discussion of pumping reductions. And our response is that the basin is currently sustainable, and the analysis that we did show that it is being operated sustainably. Pumping reductions are not being considered at this time. Future potential pumping restrictions will include outreach and communication with all of you as stakeholders, and specific methodologies for determining what those pumping reductions might be will be discussed at that time. We have not even begun those conversations because frankly, the basin's sustainable. We don't need to yet. Comment number 3 was on disadvantaged communities and domestic users. And the comments noted that the GSP needs to recognize that there are no disadvantaged communities in the basin, though there are domestic wells, and there was some concern raised that the minimum thresholds that we established may not be protective of domestic users. So what we did is I added an additional section to the GSP. That was section 2.1.2. If you go there, that discusses disadvantaged communities, the fact that there are none in the basin, and gives just a little bit more detail on basin demographics, number of population in the basin, things like that. And then we went in and pretty substantially revised section 8.2 to better explain how the minimum thresholds are protective of known domestic wells and users. And so we added a new table 8.2 that compares the domestic well depths for the, I think, 3 or 4 domestic wells that are located within the basin to the minimum thresholds, and essentially shows that those minimum thresholds are protective and will ensure that those domestic well users will be able to continue using those wells. So that was one of the bigger changes that we did make. Item number 4 was on the GDEs assessment, and the comments that we received requested that the identification of interconnected surface waters be expanded with additional detail. There were questions about the basis for the 30-foot depth to groundwater criteria that we used for identification of potential GDEs. There were concern that there was insufficient field study of those potential GDEs. So we pretty significantly revised the plan in 2 sections as well in response to this set of comments. And the first place was in section 4.7, where we further expanded on our approach for the GDEs assessment, and we clarified the methodology that we use for mapping these areas. We provided a little bit more detail on the modeling of interconnected surface waters that we'd done with the SPV model, and then also the rationale for using that 30-foot routing depth. And that was based on some guidance from the Nature Conservancy had developed a guidance document for identification of GDEs really early in the SGMA planning process. And most of the basins, at least that I'm familiar with, are kind of using that as a threshold for trying to define where, in fact, there are GDEs within their basins. We also added a new planning threshold. So remember, when we developed our minimum thresholds, we had a conversation around how do we make sure that we're addressing the problem before groundwater levels get down to that minimum threshold. So we established a planning threshold, which was a little bit higher, which would give us that early warning light to start some of our management activities. So we added a planning threshold to section 8.7 that would essentially require implementation of that detailed GDEs study if groundwater elevation adjacent to those groundwater dependent ecosystems, and we have a defined set of key wells that are adjacent to the GDEs. If groundwater levels reach that planning threshold, then the GSAs will start that detailed GDEs study, and we'll be able to better manage those habitats in relation to groundwater elevations. And then we revised Management Action 8, which is in Chapter 9, Section 9, to explain that GDE study may be implemented prior to the 5-year update. And that was just related to timing based on some of the stakeholder input that we got in those letters. So category 5 of our comments received were around public engagement and access. And there was some concern raised that the stakeholder engagement during the GSP was insufficient. And so what we did is we expanded the description in section 1.5 of the plan to better describe in more detail the role of the advisory committee, all of the different participants in the advisory committee, the participants in the technical peer review group, and then all of the different ways that we tried to engage you all, the stakeholders, in terms of the stakeholder email list and the website and the posting of notices, and agendas in advance, so you can see what were, the topics of all meetings and things like that. So hopefully that further kind of demonstrated the GSA's commitment to engagement. This was a pretty extensive engagement process as part of this GSP. The 6th grouping was the model construction and calibration. There was concern raised about the vertical hydraulic conductivity and other values used in the SPV groundwater model, particularly surrounding some of the USGS monitoring wells used in the calibration process. And the responses provided further explanation of our approach for model development and boundary conditions, as well as the basis for calibration of select parameters of interest to the reviewers. And so we explained in a little bit more detail, both in the model documentation appendix as well as in the chapter. And noted essentially that the model layer construction and connectivity, all of these issues were discussed with the technical peer review group, and some changes had been made during the modeling process and the planning process in response to those conversations and the input received from the TPR. So the last 3 buckets of comments. 7 was water quality monitoring and thresholds. We received comments expressing concern about the degradation of water quality, specifically related to the concentration of total dissolved solids, TDS, and nitrogen in domestic wells. This was somewhat related back up to the disadvantaged community and domestic well item that I had previously mentioned. And we did review and revisit the TDS minimum thresholds in section 8.5, and those were revised with additional detail and description of the minimum thresholds. So essentially, the minimum thresholds were brought down in concentration a little bit to make sure that those the domestic wells were protected as part of the planning process. The response also explains and points to several of the management actions that were geared toward improving water quality. So there's a number of things that were included as management actions, things like, farming BMPs and outreach around TDS and nitrate concentrations in domestic wells, and working with the city's PUD department on restoration projects. So all of those different kinds of activities that would support improvements in water quality. Category number 8 were the Sutherland Dam releases. As I mentioned, we got lots of comments requesting an evaluation of surface water recharge from Sutherland Dam releases. And that was, covered in the first part of the presentation today. Management action number 7, we'd already included in the draft GSP, and we're in the process right now of fleshing out that scope of work and moving that study forward. And then the 9th category were just our general comments on texts and figures. And so we did review, we went back and we reviewed all of the text and figures and made updates and made sure that we updated for clarity. So I think that was an overview of the primary kind of groupings of comments that we received from all of you. And we welcome any additional thoughts or questions or clarifications. I don't see any new comments in the chat. Do either of the 2 callers have any questions or comments? Lonnie, looks like you have a comment. Go ahead.
Thank you. Again, Lonnie Lutar, representing Rancho Ejido. I wanted to acknowledge staff for bringing this workshop forward, and to the council really for encouraging this opportunity, because the conversation and the presentation that was given today is precisely what we were seeking. After the draft was completed and public comments were submitted, although the response to comments were published, it was published within a pretty short time frame before going to committee. And there were a lot of concerns and questions. We appreciate that a lot of the input that we provided directly to the council offices and to PUD staff have been taken into consideration and have been incorporated into what you've outlined today. We do still have some ongoing concerns, and we'll continue to share those as we move forward, but this is tremendous progress. And so I wanted to thank everyone involved for listening and being responsive, particularly Councilmember Marnie von Wilpert and her staff, and Councilmember Kate that again encourage this dialogue, so that, you know, again, we could discuss all of this, and also to the environmental community, Dan Silver with EHL and TNC and all of those groups for weighing in, even though they weren't part of the meetings leading up to this point. I think they provided such valuable input in their comment letters, and so to be able to hear the city's response to that extremely important input that was provided is invaluable. And so we hope they'll continue to participate as this plan moves forward, particularly with the next study. And we appreciate that you'll have these milestone public workshop opportunities so that there is transparency and this genuine engagement that we've been asking for, and appreciate that you're committed to doing that moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Lonnie.
I'm sorry. Did you call on me?
Nope, I just said thank you to Lonnie, but you're welcome to speak up, Frank.
The question I had is, are you accepting written comments after this presentation today?
Sure. Yeah, will you accept comments and questions at any time? Just send them over to Karina.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think what we'd like to do is maybe give you guys a deadline as to when to provide feedback. Maybe, why don't we say by the end of next week? Is that acceptable? Does that work for everyone? Okay, so if you guys have additional comments, or you guys maybe have forgotten them, or you want to put some thought into what you want to ask or what your comment is going to be, you can definitely email them to me by Friday of next week.
So that's November 19.
Yes.
Do you have any
thank you.
specific to the things we are presenting today?
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, because then the week after that is Thanksgiving week, and a lot of people are off. So.
Right. I have just a couple more slides, and I think it's all information that you all already know. As you know, the final draft of the SPV GSP is available on our program website, and that's on the County of San Diego website. The link is shown here, and you can download it's a final draft at this point until adoption by the GSA, which is both the City Council and the County Board of Supervisors. Those are anticipated in December and January of this year, and we must submit the final GSP to the State Department of Water Resources by January 31st of 2022. That is a hard deadline, and it's written into the SGMA legislation itself. And as I mentioned, the response to comments matrix, it's included in the final GSP in Appendix F. And then I recognize all of the names on this call, but just in case you're not signed up, I wanted to put a plug in for the county website sign up. You can always, email Karina to get on her list, but we've got the county website here has a stakeholder email list, and anytime anything goes up on our program website, everyone on that stakeholder list gets blasted out a notice so that you can go and check out what new information has been uploaded.
Yeah, for those of you guys that are new to our process, I highly encourage you guys to sign up to get these updates so that you get the latest and greatest. So if you haven't done so, please sign up. That's the best way for you to make, to ensure that you're getting all of the information. One other item I wanted to bring up, there was a question about exactly when county and city will be going to their respective governing bodies for adoption of the GSP. We don't have the exact dates just yet. It has to be done, as Rosalind mentioned, prior to us submitting the GSP to DWR, which means it has to be done prior to January 31st of 2022. But once we confirm dates, we will send out an announcement with the exact dates. You know, that requires a process for us to like meet docket closing deadlines and all of that. So we'll provide those dates as we confirm them. Thank you.
We have plenty of time if anyone else has any questions for us or comments. All right, well, hearing none, I thank you so much for your time, for giving us your time today, for listening to both agenda items, the scope for the initial surface water recharge evaluation and our response to the comments received. Again, if you have any additional thoughts or questions, send them to Karina at her email address at the city before next Friday, November 19th, would be most helpful for us. Just in the near term as we're moving forward with the Management Action 7.
Trish, congratulations on your retirement.
Oh, congratulations, Trish. That's so exciting. You'll be able to do all of the, what is it, coast to crest routes. You'll have so much more free time. All right, I am going to stop our recording.